The day is November the 20th, 1947. The time, 11 o'clock. A nation and a world watch. Once only in 1100 years of British kingship has there been such a day. An heiress presumptive to the throne marries the man of her choice. The setting is Westminster Abbey. To its west door come members of Europe's royal houses, the peers and the people. History is in the making. 3 miles away, Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, now His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, leaves. But the eyes of the world are centered on Buckingham Palace. Into the dull November morning, 2 greys draw the Irish state coach. Inside, Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth and her father. For any girl, wedding day is the day of her life. As the 21-year-old princess arrived at Westminster Abbey, it was her moment too. For Elizabeth, this was of necessity something more. From this hour, a new life begins. Mingled with her private happiness is the sure knowledge that she must now enter a widening field of public duty and responsibility. And now the solemn service begins. In this moment, charged with great meaning, the people of Britain and the Commonwealth joined. They listened and remembered, in towns and villages, in shops, in streets, in homes. For Elizabeth's destiny is great, so great that even the solemn splendor of this great moment could not altogether overshadow it. She who may one day rule over Britain and the Empire shares this heritage with her husband. The organ sounded, and for this hour, Elizabeth is not only a queen-to-be, but a bride. And now they are man and wife. The princess had been in the Abbey for nearly an hour. What followed the service was the ornate pageantry of a state occasion. It showed that this was no ordinary wedding, but that of a king's daughter. Following the bridal procession came the bride's father and mother, and behind them 5 kings, 5 queens, and 8 princes and princesses. Outside the Abbey, the great crowd waited eagerly. There was a roar of excitement as the princess, aided by her husband, appeared and stepped into the glass coach for the drive back to the palace. It was the signal for the most heartfelt outburst of affection that Britain has seen since the bride's parents led the coronation parade. For the people who had come from afar, the wedding was a family wedding for the entire British people. Everyone gladly shared in the rejoicings, because the crown once again was serving to remind us of the common humanity which unites us all. Outside the palace, 100,000 people surged forward in a solid mass. They wanted Elizabeth. They wanted Philip. From the palace balcony, Elizabeth and her husband waved to the cheering crowds. Excitement was at its peak as the King, the Queen, Queen Mary, and other members of the royal family came out to join them. Seldom has a bride and groom received such a tumultuous expression of goodwill. Inside the palace, the cameras were able to capture the exquisite workmanship of the bridal gown. Princess Margaret leads the 8 bridesmaids who have come to join the bridal pair. And now, with the King and Queen to complete the family group, here are 3 generations of Europe's royal houses. By the voice of the people, Winston Churchill is once again called to guide our destiny at a time of difficult uncertainty.
And now perhaps there may be a lull in our party strife which will enable us to understand more of what is good in our opponents and not to be so very clever at finding out all their shortcomings. I thank the returning officer and all who have assisted for the faithful and careful and efficient way in which they have discharged their duties, and I wish you all, whatever party you belong, good fortune for yourselves and for our island home. I bet.
Yesterday, he was among them at Sandringham. King to the rest of England and the Empire, but to them the squire, the kindly man who passed among them. And then...
This is London. It is with the greatest sorrow that we make the following announcement. It was announced from Sandringham at 10:45 today, February the 6th, 1952, that the King, who retired to rest last night in his usual health, passed peacefully away in his sleep earlier this morning.
The heart of the nation stops. The flags lower in tribute. Over the Mother of Parliaments, high over Big Ben, the flag is low as the news spreads. The King is dead. The King, our King, is no more with us. In Downing Street, the people gather, as always in time of trouble, as the Premier leaves to meet Parliament. The King is dead, but there is much to do, for government must continue. In front of Buckingham Palace, the crowd gathers, bewildered, as they had gathered 4 months before when the first news came that the King was seriously ill. From holiday in Balmoral, the King came then to London on medical advice. His long rest had not cured some deep-set trouble. X-ray showed structural alterations to one lung. The King was gravely ill, and even as we watched and waited, the nation prayed. Operation on the King, we read, and knew how ill he was. But success seemed to crown the skill of the surgeon. But now the King is dead, peaceful in his sleep. 15 years ago, following the abdication of his brother, George VI became king and was crowned at Westminster. With the pomp and ritual born of 1,000 years, the man who had sought the quieter part in life was crowned ruler of the greatest empire in history. The coronation oath he vowed that day, he was to redeem with a life of unselfish service. For himself, with his devoted queen, he chose the joys of the countryside whenever his heavy duties would permit. And it is as a family man that we shall best remember him. His happy family life gave the strength he so greatly needed for his task and was an inspiration to his people. Today, the nation's sorrowing sympathy goes to the gracious lady who was for 29 years his devoted partner. These were the early, happy years. Then came the war. The King had a sad and weary task to perform. Wherever his people suffered, he came, and by his presence brought comfort and assurance in their ordeal. when victory crowned our arms, the King led our rejoicing. It was the King who opened our year of festival, but we did not know then that his serious illness had already begun. The summer months, his last summer, were gladdened for the King and Queen by the birth of a granddaughter, Princess Anne. Today, her mother is our Queen Elizabeth, and Prince Charles, heir to the throne. With the birth of the grandchildren, the happy family was made complete. It was in Kenya, at the Royal Hunting Lodge, that the news of the King's death reached his daughter. When she returned from a night in the forest, it was to learn that she is now the Queen, acceding to her father's throne immediately. There is no break in the continuity of the British monarchy. It was her own decision to return at once to London. It was a bitter January day when the Princess left for Kenya. Making his first public appearance since his operation, the King seemed in good health as he walked hatless from the plane. It was the beginning of a tour he had hoped one day to make himself. It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye. He was giving the Commonwealth his life, and with it, a queen. And now the King passes from our midst. Now the King who denied his people no duty that they asked or imposed, who was their most faithful, constant, and diligent servant, takes his rest, and Britain mourns. Thus elevated by the combined power of church and state, the Queen moves to the throne to receive the homage of her princes and peers. The Duke of Edinburgh comes to vow lifelong allegiance to his Queen. Homage draws to a close, and following the celebration of Holy Communion, which forms the framework of the service, the Queen moves for a short recess to St. Edward's Chapel. Within the chapel, the Queen's robe royal is changed for a robe of purple velvet, and her crown replaced with the imperial state crown. When she appears to join her procession, the service of coronation has ended. Special filtering bunny masks are the latest weapons devised to combat smog, which last winter killed 4,000 Londoners in a single week. Dogs as well can be protected against the deadly fumes which throw a heavy pall across Britain's big cities every year. Ordinary fog does little harm, but smog, a mixture of smoke and fog, has become one of the greatest mass murderers of modern times. Every year, railways, factories and private homes exude 2.5 million tons of smoke over England and Wales. New flats without chimneys are part of the campaign to clear Britain's air. Until smokeless fuels are more widely used and gas and electricity play their full part in homes as well as in factories, smog will continue to shroud our cities and to kill. Despite their smokeless home in Lambeth, Mrs. Mitchie and her family are still threatened by smog, which can travel hundreds of miles. Flats like theirs are the first step towards its banishment. Though little Paul Mitchie sets Father Christmas a new problem. Through the door, please, he says. Not the chimney. We haven't got one. Queen Mary is dead. This great lady of Britain, whose life spanned 6 reigns. With grief born of respect and love, the nation learns the sad tidings. For many weeks, we knew she had been ill, yet still we cannot grasp that she has gone. Long had she been with us, until it seemed that time itself could not overcome that unconquerable spirit that had borne her through the years. On the day of her death, crowds had gathered outside Marlborough House to read the first bulletin that told that Her Majesty's health had seriously weakened. Speedily the news spread, and we learned with sudden shock that Queen Mary's condition, which so recently had been reported as improving, had reached a critical stage, and that her family had been called to her bedside. The Duchess of Kent was soon to be followed by the Duke of Windsor, who journeyed from America a few weeks ago to be with his mother during her illness. Then, just after midday, another bulletin reported that Queen Mary's condition had worsened. The Queen Mother, her daughter-in-law, arrived to be with her at this anxious moment. Then the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh and Princess Margaret came to visit the very gracious lady who lay so ill in Marlborough House. Through the long evening, the crowds waited until at last they learned that Queen Mary had died peacefully in her sleep. This is how we will remember her. A proud, charming queen, a lady of vigor to the last. And even when the years gently weakened her energy and she took to a wheelchair, she showed that same enthusiasm that had been among her most endearing qualities all her life. That same genuine love of being shown around was the same 29 years ago when she visited the Wembley exhibition with her husband, King George V. And when the traditional duties of state called, as at royal garden parties, Queen Mary revealed the charm and dignity that made her above all a great queen. Strict to obey each call of duty, she had taught her children to follow the same path. In 1935, at the Silver Jubilee, our present Queen and her sister watched their grandparents ride through London to celebrate their reign of 25 years, years in which they had won the affection of all their peoples. Within 8 months of the Silver Jubilee, King George lay dead. and his eldest son became our sovereign, Edward VIII, the king who never wore a crown. Instead, his brother was crowned in Westminster Abbey as King George VI. Close by that same abbey was placed a statue to his father, built from a fund subscribed to by his people. Side by side stood his wife and son for the unveiling ceremony. Queen Mary became a great-grandmother with the birth of Prince Charles. Her husband and two of her sons had been kings. In her turn, her granddaughter has become our queen. And one day in the years ahead, her great-grandson will be our king. A grand old lady, we called her, and in those words we expressed a wealth of affection for the queen of such simple pleasures. Now she who became so much a part of all our lives lives no more. The nation mourns the passing of so great and gracious a lady, so kindly and dignified a queen. The BOAC Stratocruiser Canopus comes into Bermuda, starting point of Her Majesty's tour of the Commonwealth. Only 17 hours after the Queen left London, the colony's highest dignitaries wait to welcome her as Canopus taxis to the reception building at Kindley Airfield. First to greet Her Majesty and the Duke as they step into the sunshine are the Governor, Sir Alexander Hood, and Lady Hood. Escorted by Sir Alexander, the Queen prepares for her brief tour of the islands, which hold a special place in our history, for they form the oldest self-governing colony in the Empire. Nearly every one of Bermuda's 38,000 inhabitants has an opportunity of welcoming Her Majesty and the Duke. This is St. George's, which was once the colony capital. The Queen and her husband pay a visit to St. Peter's Church, which stands on what is probably the oldest Anglo-Saxon church site in the Western Hemisphere. The rector, the Reverend Stowe, and the governor escort Her Majesty from the church. Hamilton, the capital of the colony, puts out its banners of welcome for the Queen, who is the first reigning sovereign ever to visit Bermuda. The Royal Landau halts at the entrance to the city. The Mayor of Hamilton, Mr. E.R. Williams, extends a loyal greeting to the Queen. All Boys Point on Hamilton's waterfront is the next stopping place on the royal route. The Queen, who has changed into a light yellow dress, asked especially that she might meet some of Bermuda's ex-servicemen. Several hundred veterans, together with representatives of youth organizations, are assembled to greet Her Majesty. Soon the Queen leaves Bermuda. On across the Caribbean to Jamaica flies the royal plane, and here too a great welcome awaits the Queen and Prince Philip. At Montego Bay Airfield, Jamaican constabulary form a guard of honor. The Queen, it is now known, invested the aircraft's pilot, Captain Lorraine, with the insignia of MVO as Canopus taxied in. The Governor, Sir Hugh Foote, greets Jamaica's royal visitors. Mr. W.A. Bustamante, the Chief Minister of Jamaica, is presented to the Queen, who now moves on to meet delegates from the legislatures of other West Indian colonies, which she will not be able to visit during her 50,000-mile tour. As we go to press comes news that Her Majesty has boarded the liner Gothic to set sail for her possessions in the Pacific. The day when the Queen is to open Parliament in state is also, by happy coincidence, the 80th birthday of Sir Winston Churchill, Her Majesty's First Minister, and undoubtedly the greatest man of our century. Measuring 3 feet 4 inches in diameter is this giant birthday present from a London baker. Now a vast bouquet of English roses, divided into 2 displays so that it may pass through the doorway. Thousands of similar gifts have been sent from all over the world to honor Sir Winston, who leaves Downing Street to attend the state opening of Parliament. Meanwhile, members of the Lords and Commons and their wives enter for the ceremony. The downpour of rain suddenly stops and a rainbow curves across the London sky. Even the weather is kind for such an important birthday as this. The Irish state coach brings Her Majesty and Prince Philip to Westminster. The Queen, who is to make a speech from the throne, wears a glittering coronet of pearls and diamonds. Outside the House of Lords, the Sovereign's escort of household cavalry lines up, as, accompanied by her husband, the Queen enters to deliver her address, and to seek God's blessing upon the council of her ministers. At noon, the scene changes to Westminster Hall, where drum beats, sounding the victory signal, herald the entrance of Sir Winston. Appropriately, it is the leader of the opposition, Mr. Attlee, who speaks for members of all parties in congratulating the Premier and presenting their gift.
On behalf of both Houses of Parliament, Prime Minister, I ask you to accept this portrait.
The portrait is the work of Graham Sutherland, one of the most famous and controversial painters of our time. Doubtless, Sir Winston has very decided views about the portrait, for of course he is a skilled painter himself. Now the Premier is to receive another birthday gift. The father of the house, Mr. Grenfell, presents a book signed by all but a handful of members of the House of Commons. It is their personal tribute to the man who has guided the destinies of our nation with such vigor and courage through some of the grimmest hours of our history. Now Sir Winston, described by Mr. Attlee as the last of the great orators who can touch the heights, thanks his fellow members.
This is, to me, the most memorable public occasion of my life. No one has ever received a similar mark of honor before. There has not been anything like it in British history, and indeed I doubt whether any of the modern democracies abroad has shown such a degree of kindness and generosity to a party politician who has not yet retired and may at any time be involved in controversy. The portrait is a remarkable example of modern art. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now nearing the end of my journey. I hope I still have some services to render. However that may be, and whatever may befall, I am sure I shall never forget the emotions of this day, or be able fully to express my gratitude to those colleagues and companions with whom I have lived my life for this wonderful honor they have done me.
Officially, he is the British Air Attaché in Brussels, wartime fighter ace, talented amateur jockey, a familiar figure of the continental turf. Group Captain Peter Woolridge Townsend, CVO, DSO, DFC and Bar, mentioned in dispatches, former equerry to Her Majesty. But he is also the man the world has been talking about more and more over the past 2 years. Seldom can a man have been so widely discussed without being able to say a word for himself. Now he comes home, and at once he is front page news, because for the first time in 2 years, Princess Margaret is in London too. Princess Margaret, third in line for the throne of Britain, now 25 and legally in control of her own destiny. Reporters and cameramen crowd round Group Captain Townsend's car as he drives away, but still he can say nothing. Outside Clarence House, where Princess Margaret and the Queen Mother are in residence, more cameras, more crowds. Meanwhile, Group Captain Townsend stays with a friend in Lowndes Square. More crowds, more cameras. Center of interest is the Group Captain's small Renault car, looking like any other in the square, except for its Belgian number and diplomatic plate, and for the racing saddle on the back seat. When he finally emerges, police have to clear a way for him. Not only the press want to see him. Whatever the answer to the question millions are asking, no one can doubt the warmth of the sympathy countless ordinary people have for him. Apart from anything else, they feel he has preserved his dignity and calm remarkably well through 2 difficult years of public curiosity. 2-hour visit to Clarence House, still without comment either from himself or from the palace, sweeps everything else from the front page of most London newspapers. Whatever the outcome, the world wishes well to a very gallant gentleman. Tribute is paid today to another fighting sailor, a sub-lieutenant of the Battle of Jutland who became King George VI of England. The Queen Mother and Princess Margaret are present for the unveiling of his statue, which is to be performed by his daughter and successor, Queen Elizabeth II. It was Sir Winston Churchill who proposed 3 years ago that a national memorial to King George VI be established. First of all, he said, we must raise a statue in London to carry to the living generation and to those who come after us a physical presence of the King. This is our first task. Today, that task is accomplished. The Queen reveals the statue of her father, a man who, in her own words, expected to support the throne rather than to fill it. But the unsparing devotion which he gave to his duties as Duke of York enabled him to assume with resolution the burden of sovereignty.
Today is Trafalgar Day, and it is fitting that this ceremony should take place on the anniversary of one of the great events in our history as a seafaring nation. Throughout his life, my father had a deep concern for the welfare of the services, both in peace and war. He saw active service in the Royal Navy. He was the first of his family to enter the Royal Air Force. By his visits to his forces in the field, in Africa and Europe, he brought encouragement to those who had long been parted from their homes and families. He was the living symbol of our steadfastness. He never wavered in his faith that with God's help, the cause of freedom would prevail.
Thus, on Nelson's Day, we honor a sailor king who, like his father, upheld the Nelson tradition.
On April the 4th, an epoch in British history ended with the resignation of Sir Winston Churchill as Prime Minister. That morning, crowds gathered in Downing Street to try to catch a glimpse of the great Englishman. For the last time, the cabinet is summoned by the man who had led us to victory in the war. Sir Anthony Eden was there, Sir Winston's right-hand man for so long. He was now to be his successor. Colleagues he had inspired in office came to take their farewells. Some had not been born when he first entered Parliament. Many were in swaddling clothes when he first became a cabinet minister. The crowd watches the ministers leave, sad-faced at the parting. It is 15 years since Sir Winston first came to number 10. Now he relinquishes the role of Her Majesty's First Minister. With the characteristic cigar clutched in his hand, the evergreen man of 80 years and 4 months sets out to tender his resignation to the young Queen. The man who in 1940 had said that he had nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat, has paid his part of the bargain in full. It has always been Sir Winston's habit when Prime Minister to have an audience of the Queen on Tuesday night at Buckingham Palace. But this is the last. Now, the man who through the darkest days of the war would report regularly to the Sovereign all the great affairs of state, all the triumphs and all the failures, is no longer Prime Minister. The night before, he had been host to the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh at number 10 Downing Street. He wears the sash of the Garter. When he was made a Knight of the Order in 1953, he became only the 6th commoner this century to be so honored. King George VI had offered it to him in 1945, but he had then asked leave to decline it. Sir Winston took an important part in the ceremonies attending the coronation, and has probably been nearer to the Sovereign than any Prime Minister for many years. In proposing her health at the dinner, he spoke of the brilliant opening of the Queen's reign and called her the young, gleaming champion of the wise and kindly way of life. Over 30 guests attended the dinner, many of them colleagues who had served with him in the war. The statesman who had served as a subaltern in the reign of the Queen's great-great-grandmother and who had served in political office or Parliament in the 5 reigns since, has his last public leave-taking of the Queen as Prime Minister. And so into a well-earned retirement goes this great Englishman, a man whose deeds and words will live as long as the English tongue is spoken, honored alike by political opponents as he is by his political colleagues. And now upon the shoulders of Sir Anthony falls the role of the Queen's First Minister. Long versed in the affairs of state, we wish him well in the heavy tasks that lie ahead.